Hello and welcome to Rogue Voice, conversations that connect and inspire. I'm Tiffany Cooper.
And I'm Jessica Gomez. When I first moved to Oregon, there was a couple of things that I noticed right away that made our region and our culture here pretty unique. And one of them is that people love reggae music here, despite that we are thousands of miles from its country of origin. But the thing that you need to understand is that once you realize the culture that's surrounding that and the fact that we grow a lot of cannabis in the area, it starts to make a lot more sense.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you noticed that.
Absolutely. I didn't know a lot about the cannabis industry until I lived in Alaska, and I start to educate myself about the industry. But I mean, moving here, moving to Ashland, Oregon, and now, in Minneapolis, I realized there's so much more to know and learn, but I don't have to, wonder what to learn now, because to dispel some of the misconceptions and myths surrounding the Oregon cannabis industry, we have invited two very special guests. Please let me introduce Matt Ochoa, founder and CEO of Jefferson Packing House, and Natalie Castañeda, financial advisor, creative entrepreneur, and co-founder of Jefferson Packing House. Welcome both to the show.
Welcome.
A medicine for a lot of people, and one that I ended up using a lot for. I have epilepsy, so that is one of my main medicines is CBD from hemp and from cannabis. And so I learned a lot on the way, a lot about regulation and just, starting a business in general. But yeah, there's a lot of different perspectives on cannabis. There's a lot of politically and also the actual farming of it. And then the culture around it, the consumption culture. So that was a huge learning experience for me.
Well, thank you for sharing that, because I guess I just made the assumption you knew a lot. You learned basically on the job as you were, moving about and going into business. Matt, I want to pivot and ask you. So you grew up here in the region. Can you share a little bit about the history of Oregon cannabis in this industry in Oregon?
Yeah, so there was a big movement in the 60s and 70s to go back to the earth, kind of back to the woods kind of movement. And so there are a lot of people that moved from LA, San Francisco, all over California, wanting to get into more, less densely populated areas. And, the downside of that is it's hard to figure out a way to make money. And the two things kind of went together where, there was this whole, hippie movement. And so all these people went out to the woods and learned how to do this, 40 years ago or a generation ago. And that wound up creating this kind of sustainable living for people off the grid. And that was great for a long time. And, through my childhood, I remember the dads going off on the motorcycles into the woods, and it was just kind of an unspoken, you just know, you don't ask. It was I don't remember being told not to or anything else. I just remember being oh, this is the part where we don't say, can we come with you?
Yeah.
And then going to see neighbors' places, and their houses were actually buried under the ground, and people having that really spook feeling. In fact, in 2016, when I first got into the legal side of it, I was up at a medical garden that we were doing with a partnership, and I called the sheriffs and I was like, hey, I have twin daughters that are 14 years old. Can I have them come work? And they said, well, yeah, it's legal now. We look at it like ag. They're welcome to. And that was just kind of an amazing transition. And then when we were up there, one of the police airplanes flew over, and they hardly took notice to it. And that kind of struck me, because for my entire growing up, if you saw anything that could see your garden, it was who is that? What do they want? Are we going to be in trouble? And so I pointed it out to the girls, and I was like, see that plane up there? And they're like, oh yeah, okay. I was like, that's a police airplane. And when I was your age, if we'd have seen that, we'd have all been running for the woods. And every time we came to the garden for the next, however long, you'd be worried about people coming out with serious artillery, throwing everybody on the ground and dragging you away. And they're like, what, for this? We're just growing these plants, and they're really blown away that could be a reality. And, that's what I grew up in was that, you know, life could be over at any minute because we're participating in this industry. And so it's been, you know, it's taken a long time to get used to. Like when I first started doing all my applications for the industry, when I started doing my licensing and my business applications and stuff, it was really hard for me to even type marijuana into a keyboard. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to write marijuana and submit it to the government on purpose. You know, like that took a long time to get used to.
Wow.
One of our first
Somebody comes and tries to arrest me.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm going to give him my real name, my address, where I'm going to be. Like, this is just weird.
I still had that experience with other cannabis insurance applicants while I worked at an insurance firm, and I was trying to reassure them, it's okay, you can email me back, you can talk to me, and we can type these words here.
Yeah.
It's all right to fill this application.
I think, you know, for so long, like you said, it was, you know, one of those things that people didn't talk a lot about, but if you were kind of in that crowd, it was a really, just a really loving, sort of interesting culture to be around and be part of. And, you know, people really put a lot of effort into being sustainable and thinking about just the way that they cultivated this plant and everything that kind of went in it. There was, you know, there was really a lot of really, I think, really positive things in that as well. And so, you know, when we got medical legalized, you know, that was a really great thing, because I think it opened people's perception about, you know, what this really was, and that, you know, it's not just a recreational drug. And, you know, I don't know if you can, maybe you can comment on that, because I think it's, you know, that really helped to dispel a lot of the stigma around growing and what this industry could be like and would be like in the future.
Yeah, I mean, even for myself, one of the things I was surprised to read was that before Prohibition, marijuana was one of the #1 prescribed medicines by doctors. There was like 100 different ailments that it was prescribed for.
Wow.
And, you know, that kind of blew my mind. And then even on the recreational side, like I had a lot of people who were, you know, there was 15 years of the medical movement where it like really pushed a lot of the medical side of things. And then when it came to the recreational, it was almost like there was this like, oh, well, that's just the recreational side. Like it didn't have value in the same way the medicinal side did. And, you know, I remember telling people like, well, you know, you want to tell me laughing isn't good medicine? You know, like this is like enjoying yourself is actually healthy. And so, you know, there's this pushback that I got going into the recreational transition where it was like, oh, now you're just going to be in the like, you know, unconscious side of the industry or something. And it's, you know, it's been a transition in a lot of ways where, you know, there's been a ton of money coming into it and trying to maintain like the culture around it. And all that side of it has been, you know, kind of what we set out to stand for was like, you know, I guess to go back a second, one of the big myths around the industry was like black market was like bad people doing bad things.
Right.
And, you know, I always spoke to my experience, which was like, no, I hang out with friends and family. I go to see people at the home that they live and homeschool their kids on. And I, you know, like I help provide their, you know, sustainability. And, but because I'm the one that took it out and sold it in the open market or the, you know, the everywhere else. And so it's been interesting seeing how like people think now that it's going towards a white market, it's supposed to be more trustworthy or whatever. And I've personally been hugely disappointed by taking people's word in big transactions where it used to be like, you know, I could hand an enormous amount of cash or value to somebody and not think twice about it. Like they're going to trust it. They're going to take as good a care of it as I would. And it's been hard for me to transition into like, everything has to be spelled out. Everything has to be contractualized. Everything has to be checked by lawyers, you know, like, it's an interesting transition.
Did you?
That is interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. Did you? I know that there's been a lot of people kind of coming into the area to grow and to be part of the industry that maybe wouldn't normally find their way to Oregon. But because of that change in the law. You have people that are farming in all kinds of different ways. And, I was at a meeting with the county with someone who was talking about this, where they laid out cement, like asphalt all throughout their, where they were going to grow, and were growing in raised beds. And it was just, I kind of felt sad to hear, that people were kind of, really doing it in that way. And you think, well, gosh, that isn't the way, people would normally sort of, farm.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big shift in a lot of ways. And, I think it's true anywhere there's the idea of big money, you bring all kinds of people. The whole, the thought that people are going to get rich quick or whatever, it brings its own challenges,
Yeah.
Well, when you're speaking of challenges, I'd just love to you to elaborate a little bit more about, if you could talk a little bit more about, budget to market. How is that, bringing it from budget to actual market?
So there's two aspects, the theme being the myths, so there's two places where there's a giant lack of, clarity and truth understanding to outcome, and that's in operations and budgeting. And so in both those places is kind of what we kind of set out to address with our business model. I knew that, seeing people scale from 1 to 5 plants up to like 40 plants, up to 100 plants, or actually it was like 96 that people would usually do on the medical side. You just saw that, like, the fall down in understanding the kind of the J curve in production, where, you can't just call a couple of your buddies and have them come help you harvest. You're asking people to come and put in 10 to 16 hour days for 2 weeks straight, and your buddy's not going to do that for you, no matter how many beers you buy them. And so and when you have 300 farms taking on the same challenge at once, all of a sudden the labor pool is diminished. And, every aspect of it is, the guy building fences is all of a sudden 6 months out. The wells, to get your water approved, our water master saw 10 applications for commercial wells in the previous 10 years before recreational marijuana came. They had 200 applications in the first 4 months, because people were having to have commercial water rights to grow legally on their property all of a sudden. And so, there was all these unexpected fall downs that just wound up holding up people on every aspect, from the concrete to the HVAC guy to, even just getting power pulled. You call Pacific Power and they'd be 4 months out to be able to dig a ditch and pull the power to your dry room. And so that was where we kind of identified and said, okay, look, we saw that coming after I spent 10 years in the event industry before this. And so we did events that were everything from a little party for 20 people up to 20,000 person events that were acres large, and just getting a feel for that scalability made a huge difference in coming back into the industry and saying, seeing how that challenge arises in this. And so that's kind of what gave us comfort in going into the scale we did. People were like, what makes you think people are going to need 20,000 square feet of dry room space? Don't you think people will know that they need dry room? It's like, yeah, knowing you need it is completely different than being properly timelined and budgeted for it. And we found that that's very true. Every year there's new clients who have new circumstances that come up that make it to where they need help. And one of those things is huge success. Oh my God, we grew twice as much as we thought we were going to. Well, we built the grow room for the projected amount, or that we built the dry room for the projected amount. And then on the budget side, it's just people have a really hard time conceptualizing capital expenditures over time. You can look at it and say with hemp this year, everybody thought, oh, you just buy a couple $1,000s worth of seeds. You need 2,000 seeds per acre. They're $1 a seed. I'm going to spend $2,000. And I hear I can make $140,000, $400,000 an acre. Great, I'm in. Everybody jumped, right? But what they didn't realize is there's another, sometimes between $8,000 and $18,000 in costs just to get to harvest. And then you get to harvest, and if you're not broke already, you can easily spend $5,000 an acre just getting your flower into the barn. not even counting if you have to pay drying services or pay to have your drying facilities built and up and running. And so all the way along the value chain of getting from the idea to the money's in the bank, there's just all these, a lot of dangers, a lot of downfalls.
Well, I mean, you're talking about, you know, the challenges of running a business with all of the complexities and the regulation and the planning that goes into it. It's, you know, it can be really daunting if your specialty is, you know, in the art itself, right? And we see that across the board and with lots of other industries too. When you talk about these really innovative entrepreneurs that have these incredible business concepts, but then the execution, it's, you know, it's really hard to sort of be that disciplined all the time when you're the creator, right?
Absolutely.
You're the crafter. You're like the master crafter.
And you're expected to wear all the hats all of a sudden.
Yes.
So, and I was thinking how much of that cost of, you know, was put into like regulation and permits and all of that.
Very little. It's mostly just agriculture production. It's, you know, I know guys that spent $40,000 just paying people to walk looking for males in their fields. You know, male plants. So like if you have male plants in your field gets pollinated, you get seeds, your product is worth half as much. It's not going to be a quality, you know, showroom flower at that point. So, so you, and, you know, people talk about having like an 85% feminization rate, which sounds great until you convert that to like, you know, what is 15% of 2,000? You have a lot of boys out there. one male plant can mess up, you know, a quarter of an acre to a whole acre to your neighbor's field. I mean, it can just cause incredible damage. There's people who pulled their whole fields out because they just had too many males they couldn't catch up with.
Yeah. Now, I think we have a question from the audience.
Yes. Yes. So we have a viewer question. It says, what do you think the hemp industry will be like here in the Valley over the next 10 years? And will it continue to expand, or is it just a fad? How do you respond? Either one of you, Natalie.
Or maybe Natalie. What do you think about that?
I think it's here to stay. I mean, the Valley has been pretty much, you know, the orchards around here are all about pears, and we've seen countless farmers pull out their entire field to grow hemp. And it is a sustainable way to, not way to farm, but a sustainable crop. We just haven't gotten to the point where we've got a good standard, you know, that we can move forward with. But I think we're on that path. So it's just, I don't know how many years, maybe.
I think it'll be 10 years before this market really develops into what it will be. I think we have, you know, 3 to 5 years left of just figuring out the equilibrium of production to consumption. We still have banking and FDA in the way of the industry taking its full stride. There's product development. There's so many things that have yet to be solidified and you know, normalized that the plant is just incredibly valuable. I mean, it's got, I don't think we've even begun to really understand the scope that we can apply this plant to.
Right.
So what do you think, I mean, just going forward, like, Natalie, what are some of your future predictions about business of cannabis? Like say, you know, from 10 to 20 years from now, in terms of the evolving evolution end goal?
I do, maybe this is more of a hope, but I do see that, I don't know if you've heard of the Emerald Triangle region. I do see the Valley becoming part of that, if not already. It's, there's just a lot of things that needs to be put into place first on the administrative and regulative side. But this is, you know, moving forward, I think this could be a really sustainable business for the Valley, create a lot of jobs. We've created a lot of jobs already, and seasonal travelers. You know, this could be even a tourism opportunity. So I know that there are a lot of people, like you were saying, coming in from Oregon. They wouldn't have even heard about Oregon maybe without hemp and cannabis being on the map. They are hopeful and pushing for what they need in their separate industries to get hemp on the map, so to speak, and to, you know, sustain its future. So that's where I see it going, you know, being really a staple in the Rogue Valley and kind of putting Oregon on the map in the sense of like Idaho potatoes or Florida oranges.
General Mills in Midwest, yeah.
Right. So
Yeah, but that's very hopeful. I mean, that's a reason to have someone not only move but stay, right?
Yeah.
So, Matt, I want to ask you. We have an audience question here. Do you think we will get to the point where the market level's off, and what is the point of oversaturation?
We're there right now. But it's in my mind, it's a false saturation that we're at right now because the Farm Bill passed, which basically gave everybody this idea that it's now completely legal. There's a green light. We're going to be able to do business as usual, and we're just going to rock just like we're growing almonds or rosemary. And the FDA came out right after harvest saying, well, this product cannot go into consumables. And the Safe Banking Act didn't get legs all the way through yet. And so, you know, people are still losing bank accounts. People are still having products seized. People are still having a lot of problems having this thing be seen as a fully legal industry. And so right now, you know, last year, I think there was something like 60 to 80,000 acres in Oregon grown. But there was Mother Nature took her toll and knocked down about half of that just to mold before harvest even hit. And then labor shortage and capital shortage took a huge hit on how much of that actually got into the barn in top quality. There's not a whole lot of premium quality flower that made it through this harvest season. And so, you know, on the biomass side, there's a total oversupply. There's oversupply on the on the raw biomass that sits right now at farms. Most of the labs have found that they can overproduce to their supply chains. And, you know, whether it's isolate, distillate, THC free, those prices are all plummeting because there's just not the uptake. But we're not seeing the uptake, not because there's a lack of demand and interest. There's a lack of continuity between interest and supply. And that breakdown is more about regulation and, simple things like you don't have packaging with a barcode that can go on the shelf and be supplied at a consistent, everything has to be consistent to get the big box stores to be a customer.
I would imagine too, there's an export component to this, right? Because, you know, it's legal here, but it's maybe not legal in other states. Can you, as we kind of work our way through this and more states come on board, I would imagine there has to be something done about the banking, and then also too, this export or sort of, creating a cohort of states that have some options when it comes to moving product around. Can you kind of maybe talk a little bit about the regulatory systems as it stands now and what you think might be where we're going?
Yeah, and there's even, I'll say, there's a giant breakdown between laws on the books and enforcement and the knowledge base of the fast changing environment.
That kind of changes those laws.
Yeah, and so you have a lot of like apprehension in the market of people not being willing to go in big yet because there's still so much uncertainty. And so, even if it is federally legal, given that it's within the federal standards, which is 0.3% THC. One of my big pieces that I feel is I don't see an accuracy in our testing to that degree. I don't think you can take the same product to 10 different labs 3 different times and get consistent within a 0.3% result. What I've seen personally is between 1 and 5% variable in test results. Yeah, I mean, like if you take, say on this, because my business is also on the THC side. So I've had many clients where, there's this kind of like industry standard that's accepted that if it's below 20% THC, nobody really wants it. If it's over, it's great. So you can have a huge break in your value by being over under that. I've had lots of clients that go and get tested, come in at like 17, 18%, and they go, oh, well, it's worth the $300 to go get another test, because the chances are good that you're going to have a different result the next time. And it's not because the science isn't there, the labs aren't there, or whatever. There's just not it's just not dialed into that consistency yet. You know, if you take a test from a different part of the plant, you can get different results. If the same plant was harvested, you know, 3 weeks before another strain, there's a difference in the development of the THC, and just in the testing process itself. You know, we're dealing with an organic matter, and you know, hops can have 3% THC in it.
Where are those test sites around? Do we have a lot here in Oregon, or are they kind of scattered all around?
They're all around, but most of them are newer labs. You know, they're gearing up for this industry, and you know, there's a handful. There's probably 5 top labs that most everybody recognizes that you can go to, and yeah, I mean, I think all the
yeah, it sounds like
that seems like it's so. I mean, I feel like we could have this conversation for another hour and a half because it's so intriguing. You guys are so knowledgeable. You're great. But I have to say we have to wrap up. I thank you, Matt and Natalie, for such a great conversation, for helping us, all of us, better understanding the cannabis industry. And I am sure our audience appreciated learning and hearing about your unique perspectives just as much as Jessica and I. So remember to tune into Rogue Voice online every Thursday at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and connect with us on our YouTube channel and Facebook, where you can send a message, and we would love to hear from you. So please leave a comment. Next week, we will be talking about the entertainment industry and how those in the industry adapting to social distancing and the guidelines as the economy begins to open up. So tune in. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you next time.